"Ma'am, I already paid for that," the Black Marine said softly, but by then the whole mall had turned to look. The words were not loud, not angry, not even defensive, yet they cut through the polished afternoon noise like something sharper than a shout. The perfume counter lights gleamed off the brass on his dress blues, off the ribbon bar aligned over his heart, off the neat edges of a uniform that had been pressed with the kind of discipline most people only recognized when they saw it up close. He had come to the mall for something small, almost tender, a silver picture frame from a department store near the east entrance, 12 inches wide, simple black trim, something his mother would like for the old family photo he had promised to replace. Outside, March wind pushed against the glass doors in warm bursts, and inside the air smelled like roasted cinnamon almonds, coffee, and expensive cologne. It should have been an ordinary stop. It should have taken 10 minutes. Instead, a white store manager in a tailored cream blazer stood stiff behind the register, her smile gone thin and cold, while a white police officer near the security kiosk moved closer with the kind of attention that made strangers step back without knowing why. People noticed the Marine first because of the uniform. Then they noticed the silence around him. Then they noticed the suspicion. The shift happened that fast. 1 second he was just a man waiting with a receipt in his hand. The next he was the center of a circle he had never asked to stand inside. A teenage boy paused with a pretzel halfway to his mouth. A mother tightened her hand around her daughter's wrist. 2 women near the cosmetics section lowered their voices, but did not stop staring. The Marine kept his shoulders straight. His name tag read Carter, small gold letters catching the light each time he breathed. He was 29 years old, 6'2" in dress shoes, broad across the chest, calm in the face, and carrying the kind of composure that usually made people trust him before he ever spoke. But that day, for reasons no receipt could fix and no metal could erase, composure was being mistaken for guilt. The manager pointed at the shopping bag on the counter and said there had been a report. The officer asked where he got the uniform. Someone in the crowd laughed under their breath, the ugly kind of laugh that wanted agreement more than humor. Carter did not react. He placed the receipt flat on the glass as carefully as if it were something fragile. His fingers were steady. That was what made the moment feel heavier, not chaos, not noise, but the steadiness of a man realizing he was being judged before anyone had decided to see him. Overhead, a pop song played too brightly through the speakers. A fountain burbled in the atrium 50 feet away. A little girl stared at him from beside a stroller, her eyes moving from his ribbons to the officer's badge, as if she could already tell one of them meant honor and the other meant trouble. Carter swallowed once and lifted his chin. He had worn that uniform at ceremonies, funerals, and homecomings. He had stood in it under August heat and winter rain. He had earned every thread on his back. And now, in the middle of a suburban mall under soft yellow lighting and the gaze of strangers who knew nothing about him, he understood something cold and familiar. Sometimes respect in America lasted only until the wrong person looked at your skin before they looked at your service. Then the officer reached for his arm, and the entire mall seemed to hold its breath. His first instinct was not anger. It was restraint, the kind that had been drilled into him long before the Marine Corps turned it into muscle memory. Isaiah Carter had learned it as a boy on the south side of Atlanta, in a brick apartment building where the radiator hissed all winter, and his mother worked double shifts at a veterans hospital with sore feet, and a smile she somehow saved for home. She used to tell him that a man did not prove his worth by how loud he could get when the world insulted him. He proved it by what he refused to become. That lesson had stayed with him through every version of himself. Through the skinny teenager's shining church shoes on Sunday mornings. Through the 18-year-old who stood in line at the recruiting office with a borrowed belt and one good white shirt. Through boot camp mornings when the air felt sharp as metal and every command hit like thunder. He had not joined to look heroic. He had joined because he needed structure, purpose, and a way to turn discipline into something larger than survival. Over time, that uniform became more than fabric. It became the cleanest language he knew. It said service before self. It said sacrifice without needing applause. It said that even in a country that often looked at a black man with suspicion first, there were still ways to stand for something nobody could honestly take from you. He had earned the medals one difficult season at a time, one deployment, one ceremony, one folded flag handed to another family, while keeping his own face steady. People saw polished shoes and straight posture. They did not see the letters he wrote home from bases that smelled like dust and jet fuel. They did not see the nights he sat awake after taps, hearing his mother's voice in memory, telling him to keep his heart clean no matter what the world threw at it. And that was why the moment at the mall felt so bitter. He had not come there to be seen. He had come because his mother was turning 60 on Sunday, and she had finally agreed to let him replace the faded frame on her dresser, the one holding a photo of him in his first uniform, grinning too hard, shoulders still too narrow for the coat. He had parked near the east entrance, walked past the food court, and checked his watch twice because he was due across town by 4:30 to meet his younger sister, Nia, at their mother's townhouse in Decatur. There was pound cake cooling on the counter there, sweet tea in the fridge, and the quiet promise of one ordinary family evening. That was all he wanted. A frame. A card. 10 minutes. But ordinary had a way of breaking around certain people. Standing under the mall lights, receipts still warm from the register, Isaiah felt the officer's hand on his sleeve and knew this was no longer about a purchase. It was about the old American habit of demanding proof from a black man, even when proof was already shining on his chest. Still, his breathing stayed measured. His jaw held. He did not yank away. He did not plead. He simply stood there, 6'2" in dress blues, carrying his mother's lesson inside him like a second uniform. The crowd saw a suspect. The mall manager saw a problem. But Isaiah Carter knew exactly who he was, and he was not going to let their doubt rewrite it. Officer Daniel Reeves had built his entire career on the confidence of being obeyed quickly and questioned slowly. He was 43, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, and polished in the way suburban authority often polished itself, with a pressed uniform, a clipped voice, and the habit of speaking as if every room had already agreed with him. In Brookhaven Hills Mall, people usually did. He knew the jewelry store owners by name, nodded at the coffee stand girls every morning, and liked the quiet little performances of respect that came with the badge, the straightening backs, the lowered voices, the instant explanations. He believed in order, at least the version of it that kept the place looking neat, controlled, and comfortable for the people who expected comfort the second they parked their luxury SUVs outside. His wife sat on the board of a private academy 20 minutes north. His son played travel baseball on weekends. His mortgage was paid on time. His lawn was trimmed in exact lines every Saturday. Men like Daniel Reeves thought of themselves as fair because they had never been forced to examine how quickly suspicion moved through them when the face in front of them was black, and the setting looked too expensive for innocence to be assumed. Beside the register, store manager Elaine Whitmore stood with her hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles showed pale against her pearl bracelet. She was 51, graceful, careful, and deeply practiced at sounding composed even when she was deciding who belonged and who did not. She had run the home goods wing for 7 years and thought of the store as an extension of her own standards. Quiet customers were good customers. Well-dressed white families browsing picture frames and wedding gifts were good customers. Any disruption, especially one that unsettled the atmosphere she sold as much as the merchandise, became a threat that had to be handled before it spread. She had watched Isaiah approach the counter in dress blues, and, instead of seeing honor, she had first seen inconsistency. A black man, formal military uniform, expensive frame, no wife beside him, no older white parent nearby. No context she was comfortable with. That was all it took. A whispered concern to security. A call for Officer Reeves. A decision made before a single question had been answered. Around them, the mall carried on with its glossy indifference, sunlight pouring through the upper skylights in soft gold bands, music rising and fading above storefront chatter, the fountain tossing silver arcs 50 feet away. Yet inside that bright, climate-controlled calm, Daniel and Elaine stood united by something colder than policy. They did not need to say it out loud. Their certainty lived in the small things, in Elaine avoiding Isaiah's eyes while insisting there was a problem, in Daniel glancing at the uniform and then past it as if it could not possibly belong to him, in the way both of them treated his calm as a challenge rather than dignity. To them, Isaiah Carter was not a son buying a birthday gift, not a Marine, not a man with a receipt still lying plain on the counter. He was an interruption to their preferred story about who moved through places like this with unquestioned belonging. And because people with power often confuse comfort with truth, Officer Reeves lifted his chin, tightened his jaw, and prepared to make an example out of the wrong man in front of the right crowd. Isaiah could feel the moment bending in the wrong direction, not because anyone had found evidence, but because the people with authority had already decided they did not need any. Officer Reeves asked him again where he got the uniform, each word carrying the slow disbelief of a man who thought the answer itself might become a confession. Elaine Whitmore kept one hand near the store phone and the other pressed against the counter, her posture rigid, her face arranged into the kind of controlled concern that looked respectable from a distance and cruel from up close. The crowd had thickened now, drawn not by truth but by tension. Screens glowed in raised hands. A boy in a red hoodie whispered to his friend. An older man in golf clothes frowned, as if inconvenience were the deepest injustice in the room. Isaiah glanced once at his receipt, still lying flat where he had placed it, and then lifted his eyes beyond the officer's shoulder. Near the atrium entrance, an elderly white man stood beside a luxury watch display, one hand braced lightly on the glass, his expression unfocused. At first it was easy to miss. The mall was bright, the music cheerful, the scene around Isaiah louder than it should have been. But Marines were trained to read a room beyond the obvious, to notice what did not fit the pattern. The man's shoulders sagged unevenly. His breathing looked shallow. A younger woman beside him, probably his daughter, was saying something with a smile that slowly faded when she realized he was not answering. Isaiah's attention shifted in an instant. The officer was still talking, still trying to box him into an accusation, but Isaiah's body had already made the moral decision before his mind put language to it. He stepped slightly to the side for a clearer look. Reeves mistook the movement for resistance and sharpened his voice. "Stay where you are." Yet Isaiah was no longer thinking about humiliation. He was thinking about the man by the display case, the grayness creeping beneath his skin, the way his hand slid on the glass as if strength were leaving him inch by inch. Isaiah spoke calmly, but with urgency now. "Sir, that man needs help." Neither Reeves nor Elaine turned. They thought it was a distraction. They thought he was trying to redirect the scene. That was the tragedy of prejudice. It not only distorted who they saw, it blinded them to what mattered. Isaiah looked again and knew he could not stay silent. Whatever this would cost him, he could not let another human being become invisible because the room was too busy doubting him. His voice carried harder this time, steady enough to cut through the crowd. "That gentleman is in distress. Call medical now." Heads turned toward the atrium. The woman beside the older man caught him as his knees gave slightly, not collapsing, but dipping enough to confirm what Isaiah had seen. Her voice cracked through the polished air. "Dad." Suddenly the crowd shifted, not away from Isaiah, but toward the emergency they had all failed to notice. Reeves spun around, startled by the change in tone, and Elaine's face lost its certainty in one quick drain of color. Isaiah did not move like a suspect. He moved like a Marine. Controlled, alert, focused. Even with an officer beside him and suspicion still hanging in the air, he kept his hands visible and said the words that changed the moral weight of the entire moment. "I am first aid certified. If you let me through, I can help him." For one suspended second, nobody moved. The bright mall seemed to split in two, one half still trapped in accusation, the other suddenly pulled toward the fragile reality of an older man losing strength under the skylight. Officer Reeves hesitated, not because he trusted Isaiah, but because hesitation was all that remained when certainty began to crack. The daughter near the watch display was calling for help now, her voice thin and frightened, one hand gripping her father's elbow while the other waved uselessly at strangers who had already started backing away. Isaiah kept his tone level. He did not beg. He did not argue. He simply repeated what mattered. "Call medical now. He needs room and air." Reeves finally spoke into his radio, but even then his eyes returned to Isaiah with the same hard suspicion, as if competence from a black man in dress blues still needed permission to be real. Elaine Whitmore stepped out from behind the counter, face pale, pearl bracelet trembling against her wrist. Around them, the crowd shifted in little uncertain ripples. The teenagers with phones lowered them halfway. A mother pulled her child closer. Someone whispered that the Marine had seen it first. Another voice answered too softly to make out. The mood was changing, but not cleanly. It was still tangled in pride, fear, and the awful human reluctance to admit who had been right. Isaiah took one careful step forward and stopped when Reeves lifted a hand across his path. The gesture was not rough. It was worse than rough. It was dismissive, the reflex of a man more committed to control than to truth. I said stay back, Reeves told him. Mall Medical is on the way. Isaiah looked past him toward the older man, whose breathing now seemed thinner. The daughter crouched beside him with the helpless posture of someone trying to hold together a moment already slipping. The Marine's throat tightened, not with rage, but with the old familiar ache of watching prejudice slow down what should have been simple. He had offered help in plain language. He had done exactly what duty demanded. And still the room treated him like risk before resource. His fingers curled once at his side, then relaxed. Restraint again. Always restraint. The officer asked for identification. The timing was almost unreal. In the middle of a medical scare, with panic rising and bystanders staring, Daniel Reeves still wanted paperwork before humanity. Isaiah met his eyes. My identification is in my breast pocket, he said. My name is Isaiah Carter, United States Marine Corps. I am trained. The daughter turned then, hearing his voice, and desperation crossed her face like a light coming on in a dark house. Can he help my father? She asked. It was a simple question, and because it came from fear rather than ego, it landed harder than anything else in the room. Reeves did not answer immediately. That silence exposed him more than any accusation could have. Elaine glanced from the officer to Isaiah and then toward the old man, as if seeing for the first time what had truly been at stake while she was protecting store appearances. Somewhere in the distance, a siren from an approaching response unit echoed faintly through the parking deck. It was close, but not close enough. Isaiah could hear the older man's daughter whispering, "Dad, stay with me. Please stay with me," and he knew every second mattered. Then, with all the eyes in the atrium fixed on him, he said the one sentence that made the crowd understand exactly who had failed this moment and who had not. You can keep doubting me later, officer, but right now that man does not have later to spare. The words landed, and then the whole atrium seemed to empty itself of sound. Not silence exactly, but something thinner, stranger, the kind of hush that comes when a room realizes its moral center has shifted and nobody wants to be the first to admit it. Officer Reeves lowered his hand by an inch, then another, the radio still pressed near his shoulder, his face tightened not by certainty now but by calculation. Around him, polished storefront glass reflected everyone back at themselves in pieces, a crowd of shoppers suspended beneath soft skylight bands and the pale shimmer of the fountain. Isaiah did not move until the path opened. Then he stepped forward with measured calm, every motion controlled, his dress shoes crossing the tile with a quiet that somehow carried farther than panic. The older man was seated awkwardly against the base of the watch display, one hand loose in his lap, his skin gray around the mouth, his daughter kneeling beside him with tears standing in her eyes but not yet falling. Isaiah dropped to one knee, careful, visible, steady. He introduced himself first, because dignity mattered even in emergency. My name is Isaiah Carter. I am here to help you. The older man blinked once, faintly, as if the voice reached him through water. Isaiah asked simple questions in an even tone, checking awareness, breathing, response, all with the practiced focus of someone trained to bring order into fearful moments without turning himself into the center of them. He guided the daughter to loosen her father's collar slightly and keep space around him. He asked bystanders to step back and let air through. This time, people listened. It happened almost instantly, that small surrender of the crowd to the person who had earned authority not through a badge, but through competence and calm. A woman set down her shopping bags. A teenage boy stopped recording and quietly urged others to move back. Someone offered a folded sweater for support. The mall music still played overhead, bright and absurd, but farther away now, as if the scene had passed into a different chamber of time. Isaiah could hear the older man's breathing, shallow but present. He could feel the daughter's fear trembling beside him like a wire pulled too tight. He could also feel Officer Reeves standing several feet away, watching, saying nothing. That silence pressed against Isaiah more than the earlier accusations had. Not because he needed an apology. He did not. But because he knew this was how grace often looked in real life. No trumpet. No instant justice. Just a man forced to prove his humanity while choosing, still, to preserve someone else's. Above them, late afternoon light poured through the skylights in a warm diagonal beam and caught the edge of Isaiah's ribbons, then the older man's silver hair, then the tear finally slipping down the daughter's cheek. For one suspended breath, everything slowed. The fountain's water rose and fell in soft loops. Footsteps stopped at the edge of the circle. Elaine Whitmore stood back near the store entrance, one hand over her mouth, her polished certainty gone. Reeves remained rigid, but the rigidity had changed. It no longer looked like command. It looked like a man standing inside the ruins of his own assumptions. Isaiah kept his attention where it belonged. He told the older man to stay with him, to take slow breaths, to listen to the sound of his voice. And in that bright, expensive mall where suspicion had arrived faster than compassion, the Black Marine whom everyone had treated like a problem became the only steady thing in the room. The first responders arrived with efficient steps and clipped voices, wheeling in a compact medical bag and a folding stretcher through the parted crowd. But even before they knelt beside the older man, the shape of the truth had already settled over the atrium. One paramedic asked who had been assisting. The daughter answered before anyone else could speak. Him, the Marine. He saw it before all of us. Her voice shook, but there was no hesitation in it now. Isaiah shifted back just enough to give them room, then clearly relayed what he had observed, how long the man had appeared distressed, how his breathing had changed, what questions he had answered, and how the crowd had finally cleared. The paramedic nodded once with immediate respect, the kind that professionals gave when they recognized another person who had acted correctly under pressure. Behind them, the onlookers stood in a different silence than before. It was no longer the hungry silence of suspicion. It was the embarrassed silence of witnesses rearranging their understanding in real time. One by one, details they had ignored began to sharpen in their minds. The medals on Isaiah's chest, the steadiness of his voice, the receipt still lying untouched on the counter 50 feet away. The fact that the only person who had seen the emergency early and acted without ego was the man they had allowed to be treated like a threat. Then the older man, still pale but more present now, opened his eyes fully and turned his head slightly toward Isaiah. His daughter leaned closer. "Dad," she whispered. The man swallowed and looked past the paramedic with the faint, fragile concentration of someone pulling words up from a great distance. He pointed weakly toward Isaiah. "That young man," he said, voice rough and thin. "That young man helped me." The daughter bowed her head as if those words released something she had been holding too tightly. "Thank you," she told Isaiah, and the gratitude in her face made the whole mall feel suddenly smaller, stripped of its polished disguises. Officer Reeves remained near the edge of the circle, but the ground under him had changed. For the first time since he approached the counter, he had no clear posture to hide behind. The badge on his chest no longer looked like certainty. It looked like weight. He glanced toward Elaine Whitmore, perhaps searching for the silent alliance that had felt so natural 20 minutes earlier, but Elaine could not meet his eyes. Her expression had gone soft with the terrible recognition that comes when prejudice stops feeling abstract and begins to wear the face of the person you have wronged. Then a new sound cut through the atrium, not loud, but distinct enough to draw every head toward the mall entrance. Two men in dark suits had stepped inside with the unmistakable bearing of federal officials, accompanied by a sharply dressed woman carrying a leather folder and scanning the scene with controlled focus. They were not local. That much was obvious immediately. Their presence moved through the crowd like a current. One of the suited men approached the nearest responder, said something low, then turned with deliberate purpose toward Isaiah Carter. Reeves noticed it at the same time everyone else did. The way the man's posture straightened. The way his eyes widened just slightly. The way authority, real authority, was now crossing the tile floor toward the Black Marine he had doubted in front of an entire mall. And when the woman opened the folder and spoke Isaiah's full name with formal precision, Officer Reeves understood, too late and all at once, that he had not humiliated an ordinary shopper. He had publicly misjudged a man whose service was known far beyond his own little jurisdiction. The woman with the leather folder stopped 3 feet from Isaiah and, in the softened hush of the atrium, addressed him with the kind of formal respect that could not be faked. "Staff Sergeant Isaiah Carter," she said, her voice clear and measured. "I am Allison Grant from the Office of the Secretary of Defense." We have been attempting to reach you regarding your commendation briefing on Monday. For a moment, nobody around them seemed to understand the sentence in full. The words were familiar English, yet in that setting they landed like a foreign language, too precise, too official, too heavy with implication for the crowd to absorb all at once. The suited man beside her stepped forward and extended a hand. "Sir, thank you for your service," he said. "More than that, thank you for your conduct here today. We were informed on arrival that you assisted a civilian in medical distress while being improperly detained." The phrase improperly detained seemed to enter the room like cold air under a locked door. Officer Reeves flinched almost invisibly, but not invisibly enough. Elaine Whitmore lowered her eyes. Somewhere behind them, a phone that had been recording dipped toward the floor. Isaiah rose slowly from one knee, not with triumph, not with the hard satisfaction many people might have expected, but with the composed dignity that had carried him through the entire afternoon. He shook the official's hand once, firmly. The older man's daughter stood nearby with both hands over her mouth now, staring at Isaiah as if she had just realized the full measure of the stranger who had steadied her father when nobody else had moved. Allison Grant opened the folder and glanced briefly at the page inside. "Staff Sergeant Carter is scheduled to receive formal recognition connected to a joint readiness initiative and prior life-saving conduct," she said, then lifted her eyes toward the responders and the small circle of witnesses. "It appears that recognition has become even more timely." The line was not theatrical, but it broke whatever remained of the old narrative. This was no suspicious shopper. This was no uncertain claimant to a uniform. This was a Marine already known at the highest levels for discipline, service, and integrity, standing in a suburban mall after being publicly doubted by people who had mistaken their own bias for judgment. Officer Reeves stepped forward at last, but the confidence that had once seemed to hold his shoulders in place was gone. His voice, when it came, was lower than before, stripped of performance. "Staff Sergeant Carter, I owe you an apology." He paused there, perhaps because apology sounds simple from a distance and impossible when the truth has witnesses. "I made assumptions I should not have made. I did not treat you with the respect you deserved." Isaiah looked at him for a long second. There was no malice in his face, but there was memory. He had not forgotten the tone, the doubt, the delay, the way his service had been questioned before his humanity had even been acknowledged. Elaine spoke next, her voice thinner, her careful polish cracked by shame. "Mr. Carter, I am sorry too. I was wrong." The daughter of the older man turned toward both of them with tears still on her cheeks and said nothing at all, yet somehow her silence judged them more honestly than anger could have. Isaiah's gaze moved from Reeves to Elaine, then briefly to the older man now being prepared for transport, color beginning to return to his face. When Isaiah finally spoke, the entire mall leaned into the sound of it. "You do not honor a uniform by saluting it after you believe it belongs to the right man," he said. "You honor it by respecting the person wearing it before your fear writes its own story." No one answered. No one could, because the truth in that sentence was larger than the mall, larger than the moment, and heavy enough to leave even the proudest people standing very still inside it. By the time the responders began wheeling the older man toward the mall entrance, the air in the atrium had changed so completely that it felt like a different place from the one Isaiah had stepped into less than an hour earlier. The same skylights still poured down late afternoon gold. The same fountain still sent silver arcs into the air. The same polished tile still reflected storefront light in soft bands across the floor. But the room no longer belonged to suspicion. It belonged to consequence. Isaiah bent once to retrieve the small department store bag still waiting near the counter, the black picture frame inside untouched, the receipt folded neatly where he had left it. That simple errand, the one meant for his mother's birthday, had somehow survived the entire ordeal with more grace than most of the people around him. Elaine Whitmore watched him from several yards away, her hands now clasped low in front of her, not with authority, but with something quieter and harder to carry. Shame had taken the sharpness out of her posture. Officer Reeves stood beside a column near the security kiosk, radio silent, shoulders no longer squared for command. He looked like a man hearing his own choices repeat back to him in a voice he could not interrupt. Allison Grant closed her folder and offered Isaiah a final nod, formal yet warm. "We will follow up with you directly, Staff Sergeant," she said. Isaiah thanked her with the same even courtesy he had given everyone else that day, whether they had earned it or not. Then he turned toward the exit. No speech followed him. No dramatic applause broke the moment. What moved through the crowd instead was subtler than that, and far more honest. People stepped aside. A woman near the cosmetic store lowered her eyes as he passed. The teenage boy in the red hoodie, the one who had watched everything from the beginning, stood straighter and placed his phone in his pocket as if he understood that some moments were not meant to be owned, only remembered. The older man's daughter, standing near the stretcher before it rolled away, reached for Isaiah's hand and squeezed it once with both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered. He answered with a gentle nod and nothing more. He did not need the scene to center him. That was never the point. Outside the glass doors, the March air felt warmer than before, carrying the faint smell of rain on concrete and the distant rush of traffic beyond the parking lot. Isaiah paused on the walkway just long enough to breathe. Behind him, through the glass, Brookhaven Hills Mall shimmered in reflections, beautiful and hollow at once, like so many American spaces where dignity was often welcome only after it had been proven under pressure. He looked down at the bag in his hand and thought of his mother waiting in Decatur, of pound cake cooling on the counter, of a small townhouse lit by kitchen lamps instead of skylights, where love did not ask for credentials before it recognized him. Then he walked toward his car, dress shoes steady against the pavement, evening light catching the edge of his ribbons one last time. Inside the mall, Officer Reeves remained motionless near the entrance, watching the black marine disappear into the gold of the sinking day. And for the first time in a very long time, the officer understood that authority without humanity was only noise in a uniform. Isaiah never looked back. He did not need to. The silence he left behind was already saying everything.